10 myths. Each one ends with someone losing exactly what they wanted most desperately to keep or to gain. Troy burns after 10 years of war over a single marriage. Orpheus loses Eurydice forever in the last 10 steps of a journey back from death. Icarus falls into the sea minutes after achieving the impossible flight his father designed. Pandora opens a container that cannot be closed again. And somehow, in every single one of these stories, hope is the last thing left. That is not a coincidence. That is a pattern worth understanding completely. The Greeks were not just telling stories about gods and monsters and impossible quests across impossible seas. They were mapping something far more familiar. The exact moment a person wants something so badly that wanting it becomes the danger itself. Pride, curiosity, love, and defiance walk into every single one of these myths, and they never walk out unchanged or unscathed. 3 goddesses walked into a wedding, and nobody was ready for what came next. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite each believed a golden apple belonged to her alone. The apple was inscribed with 3 words that have caused trouble ever since: for the fairest. A goddess named Eris had thrown it into the crowd as a gift. Her idea of fun. Zeus, wisely, refused to judge the contest himself and handed that problem to a mortal prince. Paris of Troy was young, handsome, and completely unprepared for 3 immortal women offering him the world. Hera promised kingdoms, Athena promised wisdom on the battlefield, and Aphrodite promised him the most beautiful woman alive. Paris chose Aphrodite, because of course he did. That woman was Helen, already married to the Spartan king Menelaus, which made the whole arrangement spectacularly inconvenient. Paris sailed to Sparta, accepted Menelaus's hospitality, and then sailed home with his host's wife. 10 years of war began with a bribe and a bad decision. 1,000 ships didn't sail themselves. Someone had to want this war badly enough to fill them. Menelaus, king of Sparta, wanted his wife back, and that wounded pride made him dangerous in a very specific way. His brother Agamemnon wanted something else entirely: glory, dominance, and a reason to lead every king in Greece. Odysseus, the sharpest mind on the Greek side, wanted to go home even before the war had properly started. On the Trojan shore, Hector stood ready to defend a city he hadn't asked to protect, loyal to a brother who'd caused all of this. Paris, that brother, wanted Helen, and seemed genuinely unbothered by the consequences piling up around him. Helen herself is the figure everyone argues over: a prize, a cause, a woman with almost no say in any of it. 10 years of war were waiting just beyond the horizon, patient and enormous, and already inevitable. Achilles had been sulking in his tent while Greeks bled and died on the sand below. Then Patroclus, his closest friend, borrowed his armor and marched into battle wearing another man's glory. Hector cut him down, thinking he'd killed the great Achilles himself, and that mistake would cost him everything. Grief does something to a man that no sword or spear can replicate. It burns away everything except the need for revenge. Achilles came back to the field like a storm that had been waiting offshore for weeks. He chased Hector around the walls of Troy 3 full times before the 2 men finally met face to face. One thrust, and the greatest warrior of Troy fell into the dust, with Achilles standing over him. But 10 years of war can't end with a single body on the ground. The Greeks had tried every direct assault and lost more men than any victory was worth. So Odysseus built a horse, a massive wooden horse, and filled it with soldiers. The Trojans dragged it through their own gates, celebrating what they thought was their deliverance. By morning, Troy was burning, and the war that launched 1,000 ships had finally, terribly, ended. Troy is ash, and Odysseus should be the happiest man alive on the Aegean Sea. He'd outsmarted a city, survived a decade and earned a story that would outlast every stone. But winning a war and winning the gods' favor are 2 very different things, it turns out. Odysseus had blinded the Cyclops Polyphemus, which would have been fine, except Polyphemus happened to be Poseidon's son. The god of the sea doesn't forget an insult, especially one carved into the eye of his own child. So every wave became a wall, every wind a closed door, every island a trap dressed up as a rest stop. Odysseus wasn't just sailing home, he was fighting for the right to even have one. The men around him would pay that price with their lives, one by one, island by island. What began as a victory lap turned into the longest punishment the ancient world ever put to verse. Every sailor who heard the siren song forgot the sea, forgot the ship, forgot everything but that sound. Odysseus had himself lashed to the mast so he could listen without dying, which is a very him solution. Circe, the witch of Aeaea, turned half his crew into pigs before he even had time to argue. He descended into the underworld to speak with the dead, walking past shades of men he once fought beside. Charybdis swallowed the sea whole and spat it back up in a roar of white water. Scylla reached down from her cliff and took 6 of his men in one quiet, terrible moment. Each obstacle stripped something from him: a crewman, a ship, a piece of the man he used to be. The gods who helped him were almost as dangerous as the ones who didn't. He was a brilliant man, navigating a world that kept rewriting its own rules. And still he moved forward, not because he was fearless, but because home was the only direction he knew. While Odysseus drifted between monsters and goddesses, his home was already under siege. Over 100 men had moved into his halls, eating his food and drinking his wine without shame. They called themselves suitors, but they behaved more like an occupying army with excellent table manners. Each one wanted Penelope's hand, and through her, the throne of Ithaca, which was the real prize all along. Penelope couldn't fight them with a sword, so she fought them with a loom instead. She promised to choose a husband once she finished weaving a burial shroud for Odysseus's aging father, Laertes. Every night, she quietly unraveled the day's work, buying herself another morning, another week, another year. It was a small act of defiance, but it held an entire kingdom together by a single thread. The suitors eventually discovered the trick, which meant her time was finally running out. Hades ruled everything beneath the living world, and for a long time, that was enough for him. Then he saw Persephone in a meadow, picking flowers in the golden afternoon light. The earth split open beneath her feet, and she was gone before anyone heard her scream. Demeter, goddess of the harvest, searched every corner of the world for her missing daughter without stopping to rest. She let the grain wither and the orchards go bare while she walked, hollow-eyed, through a dying landscape. Farmers watched their fields turn to dust and could not explain what they had done wrong. The living world didn't understand grief yet, not like this, not as something that could swallow entire seasons whole. Demeter wasn't mourning quietly. She was tearing the warmth out of the earth with her bare hands. Every cold morning and every empty field was a mother refusing to let the world forget what it had lost. Demeter's grief had already frozen the earth, and the gods were growing nervous about the silence. Zeus finally intervened, sending Hermes down into the dark to retrieve Persephone from Hades. There was one condition, ancient and absolute. Anyone who ate the food of the dead could never fully leave. Persephone, whether by hunger or by something harder to name, had eaten 6 pomegranate seeds. 6 small seeds, and they changed everything about how the world would work from that moment forward. Hades would keep her for 6 months of every year, 1 month for each seed she had swallowed in the dark. When Persephone descends, Demeter turns her grief loose on the fields, and the world goes cold and bare. When Persephone returns, her mother's joy breaks open into blossoms, and the soil remembers how to grow. The Greeks didn't just explain the seasons, they gave grief and reunion a reason to repeat forever. Heracles was born into a grudge he didn't start. The son of Zeus and a mortal woman Hera never forgave. From his first breath, the goddess of marriage hunted him with a patience that felt almost personal. She sent serpents to his cradle, and the infant crushed them bare-handed, which only deepened her fury. He grew into the strongest man alive, married well, and built something that looked like a life. Then Hera reached into his mind and turned it inside out, filling it with a darkness he couldn't name or fight. In that madness, Heracles killed his own wife and children, the people he loved most, gone by his own hands. When the fog lifted, what remained wasn't grief alone. It was a guilt so total it demanded an answer. The oracle at Delphi gave him one. Serve King Eurystheus, Complete whatever tasks he assigns, and earn your way back to yourself. 12 labors stood between Heracles and something like peace, each one a chance to pay a debt the gods had written for him. Heracles didn't just survive the labors, he was forged by them, one impossible task at a time. The Nemean lion had skin no blade could cut, so he strangled it with his bare, trembling hands. The Lernaean Hydra grew 2 heads for every one he severed, a wound that kept punishing him for trying. He cleaned stables that hadn't been touched in 30 years by rerouting 2 entire rivers through them. He captured a deer sacred to Artemis, a boar no one else had dared approach, and birds that stripped whole fields bare. He stole the cattle of a 3-bodied giant, fetched golden apples from a garden at the edge of the world. Then he descended into the underworld itself and walked back out alive. When the last labor was done, the gods couldn't look away anymore. They had to claim him. Mount Olympus opened, and the man who had suffered more than any mortal became something the suffering couldn't touch. Every year, Athens sent 14 young people into a maze, and none of them came back. The Minotaur waited at the center, half man, half bull, entirely hungry, fed on tribute and fear. Theseus, Prince of Athens, volunteered himself into that darkness with something most victims lacked: a plan. King Minos's daughter Ariadne saw him and made a quiet, dangerous choice to hand him a spool of thread. He tied one end at the entrance, walked into the black, and followed the string back out after the kill. The Minotaur fell, the labyrinth was broken, and Theseus sailed home carrying everything he'd promised to win. But he forgot one thing. His father Aegeus was watching the horizon for a white sail, the signal his son had survived. Theseus never changed the sail from black. Aegeus saw dark cloth against the sky and walked into the sea. The hero came home to a kingdom and a funeral at the same time. Before any hero carried a torch, one god decided humanity deserved warmth it was never meant to have. Prometheus looked down at shivering mortals and made a choice that would cost him everything, forever. He climbed to the sun's chariot, cupped a flame in hollow fennel, and carried it back down to human hands. That single act changed what it meant to be alive on this earth. Cooking, forging, building, none of it exists without that stolen, generous, defiant little fire. Zeus saw what Prometheus had done and didn't forgive it, not even slightly. The punishment was this: chained to a mountain, an eagle tears out his liver every single dawn. And every night, the liver grows back, so the eagle can return. There is no end to it, no pardon waiting at the edge of some distant year. Prometheus gave humanity its most powerful tool and paid for it with an eternity of pain. Orpheus could play the lyre so beautifully that rivers stopped moving to listen. When his wife Eurydice died from a snake bite, he did what no sane person would. He walked into the underworld. His music softened Cerberus, the 3-headed guardian who had never once stepped aside. Even Hades and Persephone, rulers of the dead, felt something crack open inside their ancient, unfeeling chests. They agreed to let Eurydice follow Orpheus back up into the living world. There was only one condition. He could not look back at her until they both reached the surface. He walked, and she followed, and the tunnel stretched on longer than any darkness has a right to. Then, he looked. Maybe he needed proof she was still there, or maybe love just couldn't survive that much silence. Eurydice dissolved back into shadow before he could even say her name. The cruelest part isn't that he failed, it's that he was one step away from everything. Daedalus built the wings because he had no other way out of Crete. He shaped each feather by hand, layered them in careful rows, and bound the whole thing together with wax. He told his son exactly where the danger lived, not in the sea below, not in the cliffs, but in the sun. Icarus listened the way young people always listen to warnings they haven't earned yet, nodding along while already imagining the climb. When they finally leaped from the tower, Daedalus flew steady, watching the horizon with the focus of a man who understood what he'd built. Icarus felt the air open beneath him, and did what the sky quietly invites every person to do. He went higher. The wax softened, then gave way, and the feathers scattered across a blue that didn't care either way. His fall wasn't a punishment handed down from above. No god pushed him. No curse was spoken. He just wanted more of something that felt extraordinary, and the world let him find out what more actually costs. The gods didn't give Pandora a box. They gave her a jar, sealed tight with everything they feared. She was crafted by Hephaestus, shaped from clay and dressed in gifts that were also, quietly, weapons. Curiosity was one of those gifts, and the gods knew exactly what curiosity does to a sealed container. When she finally opened it, every misery humans had never known came pouring out into the world. Disease, grief, envy, and slow decay. She slammed the lid down fast, but fast was already too late for all of that. Only one thing stayed behind, pressed against the bottom of the jar in the dark. Hope. And this is where the myth refuses to be simple or clean. Was hope left inside to comfort us, a small mercy the gods tucked away for harder days? Or was hope the cruelest thing of all? The one force that keeps you suffering just a little longer. Jason didn't earn the Golden Fleece so much as he borrowed someone else's power to take it. The king of Colchis set impossible tasks before him. Fire-breathing bulls, fields of armed soldiers rising from the earth. A sorceress named Medea watched from the palace walls, and she made a choice that would cost her everything she had. She gave Jason her magic, her loyalty, and eventually her home country, sailing away beside him into a life she'd built entirely on him. The Argonauts became legend, the fleece was won, and Jason returned to Greece wearing glory that wasn't entirely his own. Then he found a wealthier woman, a princess with a better throne, and he simply moved on. Medea's grief didn't stay quiet. It turned into something terrible, something the myths never let you look away from. Jason lived the rest of his life diminished, stripped of divine favor, forgotten by the gods who'd once watched over him. The fleece was real, the quest was real, but the hero at the center was hollow all along. 10 stories, 10 disasters, and somehow, every single one ends at the same door. A hero reaches for something just beyond their grasp, and the reaching itself becomes the wound. Pride cracks open a war that swallows 10 years and 1,000 ships whole. Curiosity lifts a lid that was never ever meant to be lifted by human hands. Love walks into the underworld and almost pulls someone back into the light. A father watches his son fall and understands, too late, that wings were always a warning. The Greeks didn't tell these stories to frighten people away from wanting things. They told them because wanting is exactly what makes us human. Every flaw in every myth is just a mirror held up to the face of anyone who has ever hoped too hard. And that is why these stories are still here, still breathing, still finding us wherever we are.